sessions where we are connecting the brightest minds in identity with strategies and real-world approaches that make IAM work better. I'm your host, road-weary security and identity technology partner guy, Dustin Avall, just back from Las Vegas, somewhere between here and Austin. And each CI session, we're going to sit down with people actually building and managing identity at enterprise scale. The ones who have figured out how to improve security without slowing down businesses, maybe even accelerating businesses. And a reminder, you can always use the links showcased here to ask follow-up questions of a Signal expert or book a demo if you have specific interest. But for today, let's get to it. We're focusing on how large enterprises are enhancing their existing identity programs with continuous evaluation and consistent policy enforcement across diverse systems. It's more than theoretical. Business and industry leaders are figuring out how to integrate with existing tools, security and otherwise, and include consistent access into their environments without just ripping and replacing everything. And we're joined by a pair of signalers today. Erik Gustafsson is the co-founder and chief product officer at Signal, with more than a decade of experience in the identity industry. Before Signal, Erik was CTO and co-founder at Bitium, an identity and access management company that joined Google via acquisition, where Erik was the engineering lead for multiple teams in the Google workspace, including security and cloud directory. Erik is also co-chair of the OpenID FastFed working group and a member of the SCIM working group. Hey, Erik, thanks for joining.
Hey, good to be here, Dustin.
And we have Matt Hamlin. It's a three-way here, huh? Matt Hamlin is the seasoned product executive. He has over 20 years of experience, Matt, which hardly seems possible. In identity management, leading product management, marketing, strategy, and teams all over leading technology companies. Prior to Signal, Matt served as vice president for product management, platform identity at Salesforce, where he was responsible for product strategy and innovation for all authentication services on the Salesforce core platform. Earlier in his career, Matt was in product roles at SailPoint, Sun Microsystems, Spanning Cloud Apps, EMC, and Waveset. Matt, I've seen speak. He's a writer. He blogs. He's a patent holder and industry voice, and now runs product marketing at Signal. Thank you for joining us, Matt.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for the intro.
Nice. That was a mouthful. So let me quiet down a bit and start with the basics. Continuous identity in the CI sessions here, it's a term that actually came from some of your customers that I know both of you have talked to, not from the marketing team. Erik, how did you first hear this phrase being used, and what did it tell you about what enterprises were actually experiencing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm trying to think back to when I first heard it. The industry's been talking about continuous for a long time now, in a lot of different applications. How do I continually understand who has access to what? How do I make sure there's good context around that? How do I make sure that I'm doing that consistently? Doesn't matter where I go inside the organization. But I'd say it really seemed to coalesce around this term of continuous identity earlier this year at Identiverse, when there were just multiple sessions where continuous identity was the focus of the session. This is sort of the industry coming around and coalescing and naming something that we can use to describe the modern way of architecting your identity stack, really taking a lot of concepts out of security, which is obviously a continuous type of thing. You want to make sure that bad actors aren't getting into your system. You want to do that all the time, and merging that together with the notions we've had for a long time in terms of how do we have less standing access? How do we make sure that people aren't over permissioned? How do you make sure you know who is doing what inside the organization, which had traditionally in identity world had been more of a lifecycle management type of concern. You have single sign-on, you had people who are movers or joiners or leavers. CI is really merging these two things together now, this sort of concept of doing something all the time and being both proactive and reactive to it, but leveraging your entire identity stack to also do that as well. So it's really nice to see the phrase come together and mean this system that can deal with both hey, can I do something right now? But also when something changes, can I reach out and orchestrate a change to, say, maybe remove somebody's access or kill a session?
It's a good point that I don't think we think about often enough of security being not really a point in time type of thing. It's not like you turn on the light switch, now you have security, now you turn it off. Like you want it to be happening continuously. So it makes sense to extend that into identity. But Matt, when you hear customers use this term, what's different about it? What are they describing that has changed from their existing or their previous approach in identity? Are there specific gaps that they're really trying to plug?
Yeah, definitely. I think that a lot of the stories we hear and the needs we hear from the market, and this discussion about evolving to a continuous identity, for me, a lot of it goes back to when discussions started happening years ago around zero trust, right? Sort of starting this light on this notion that you can just give people unfettered access if they're on a corporate laptop, or if they've checked in once at the front door, then they can go do everything you want, right? So, zero trust really shined a light on that and sort of focused on making sure that we're really checking to make sure that security is in place, that identities are as they say they are, not just the ones on the front door, but all along the way. You should be continuously checking to see whether this person is authenticated correctly, and so that really, I think, drove more discussions to have organizations look at their identity practices overall, to say, okay, well, if we're going to start checking on if somebody should have access to some data at this time, right? What are all the places that we're improving from where we were through this zero trust journey? What do we put in place? And so a lot of times that was more network security, or some XDR controls, or it was maybe it was continuous authentication, where they were making sure that the person was authenticated, and we just implemented MFA, multi-factor authentication. But it really starts asking the question: is this is the way I explain it to folks that are not really identity folks? Is early on, we sort of authenticate people at the front door. And so zero trust, we have a security guard there checking IDs. And so with zero trust, you sort of put more security guards around in the house. Oh, you wanted to go in this door. You want to go in this room, right? Well, let me check you again. And so now when we get to, the gap that's there is, now that a lot of that's in place, they're starting, organizations are starting saying, well, I really want to make sure that if I let somebody through this interior door, there's a good reason for them to go inside, right? We now are sort of asking those questions around context and continuity, to say, well, if they need to go in this door, the only people who can go in this door if there's a real good business reason, right? Are they on call? Is there something really bad happening behind this door that's important that I need to get through? And so a lot of the discussions about this and the gaps have been identified through a lot of this extra work that's been done around zero trust and least privilege. And on the other side of that, I think that there's definitely a long time industry interest in ensuring that people access is remediated quickly when something bad happens, right? For forever in the industry, we talked about, if somebody leaves the organization or if they change roles, which are typically lifecycle events, how do we go kill all the sessions that are live right now, right? They'll time out when sessions time out. Sometimes it's 24 hours or a week or a month, but like if somebody leaves the organization or if they change roles, we really want them to leave their existing, sessions. Are they logged into an app right now? And what happens? That session is going to still be live because they had access when they logged in. And so that's been in the industry forever, right? And so the continuous identity is starting to address that as well, right? So if the security guard checked your ID and looked at the intelligence to say, hey, is this person supposed to be here or not? They let them in the door. As soon as anything changes, and maybe they get, the security guard gets a buzz on his phone. Oh, that person shouldn't be in there anymore. We'll go get him out. Right. So that piece of the equation has been long discussed in identity, and I think that's one of the gaps that people are looking to continue, move forward with in their organizations, and continuous identity helps with that.
Yeah, cool. And if we continue the ping pong back and forth, and I go back to you, Eric, you talked a little bit about the customers coming up with this term, popularizing to some effect. And you've mentioned it's actually starting to happen, or it is happening, more continuous identity approaches at large organizations. Are there technological advances that are driving this shift? Is it things like cloud migration or the adoption of AI, or something else entirely that you're seeing?
Well, I think all of those things drive it. So cloud adoption, AI, the planning for AI adoption, the general world we live in 2025 now drives a lot of this behavior. So if you think about, we're single sign-on into everything at this point. Everything is generally a web application. Nothing is living on premise. So, back 15-ish years ago, when starting in the single sign-on space, you were still thinking about, hey, maybe we can identity the perimeter. That's, identity being the new perimeter is a pretty old saying at this point. But there's implications to doing that kind of thing. And this gets to what Matt was referring to with the initial zero trust idea, right? The initial kind of Google BeyondCorp was, hey, if you know about the user's identity and you know where they're kind of generally coming from, you can let them into an application, which is a type of single sign-on, a type of monitoring of that. But with that comes the implication that none of your solutions can be no longer bound by network effects. So you need to be always checking it. Like in a world where I come in physically into a building, or there is literally a security guard. If there's a problem and you're ejected from the building, you don't have access anymore. That's out the window now because we're all, the three of us are in completely different locations at this point in time. We interact in this virtual environment. All those technology changes drive this need for this continuous evaluation of your identity and security controls in real time. Older techniques to deal with these problems, like, hey, what if I need to have some kind of privileged access? Those are PAM solutions. Those are have been around. I mean, that's like a 25-year-old industry. Those solutions are kind of dated, and they're really focused on, say, a credential. Mm-hmm. We're living in this sort of credentialless, passwordless, pass keys or single sign-on world. So those concepts don't apply to you anymore. Or take identity governance type solutions that are really dealing with lifecycle management, like I said earlier. Those are happening on a daily basis. So that's very far. Even if you're doing it hourly, it's really far away from a kind of continuous. It leads to over provisioning. So I think what you're seeing is the pressure on the business to move quickly and in real time, and the pace that you're doing things is at odds with the identity stack that's grown up over the last 25 years. And at this point, it's really not sustaining the weight of the business needs. There's a saying, if I mentioned it a few times, various customers have, we can't IAM any harder, meaning we're not going to solve this by just doing what we're doing twice as much because it's not really being effective for us. We need to rethink this. And this is where, this continuous identity is more of a architectural framework in a way. The Signal's product gives you all the tools to do this, but we do it in collaboration with things you already have. But this is about orchestrating these outcomes that you want for the business, leveraging your identity and security controls that already exist to get those outcomes. And so that's really, I'd say, what's driving the shift here is that realization, like, we should pull these techniques all together and be doing it all at the same time. Like the security guard analogy is great. The one I like to use is, think of a hotel where you get a key card for your room, right? You're allowed to be in your room a certain amount of time. Once your reservation is expired, you have to leave the room. Your key card will stop working. Like, we need that in the virtual world too. We need to be always in, like, I only have access to my room. And if I go upgrade and get the presidential suite, like, I have access to that room, I lose access to the other one. So we don't operate like that in the identity space generally yet. But that's where these large customers are all moving to, because it's almost out of necessity. Like, they're not getting what they need. We still have identity breaches. They're not getting what they need out of their existing system. And it's not like they haven't been spending a lot of time and money and blood, sweat, and tears on implementing those systems.
Yeah, it sounds like you're describing this identity stack kind of as something I've heard you say. I think you called it like layers of archaeology, where there, in a typical Fortune 500 environment, there's all those components that you just mentioned, right? If it's a mature IAM practice, which of course many of those Fortune 500 companies are, if not all of them, they are IAMing hard, right? They have IGA, they have PAM, they have SSO and IDP, and it's just not suited for today's challenges. Am I describing that accurately?
I'd say it's kind of foundational in that way. It's layers of archaeology. We built the modern business enterprise on top of a bunch of foundations that span back over time. So yes, they'll have privileged access management tools, identity governance tools, single sign-on tools, ITDR tools, device management tools, XDR tools, SIMs. The list of acronyms goes on and on and on. And an enterprise will have all of these, and probably 2 or 3 of them, depending on how many mergers and acquisitions they've done, depending on how their buying practices work. And they've cobbled together this solution. They built this house on top of this foundation. And it's like, think of like a skyscraper being built on top of, the former ruins of a Roman villa or something. it's slowly, eventually, it's going to be like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. It's going to slowly tip over and not longer be suitable. So that's sort of the archaeology. And not all those foundations are bad. Like you can actually build on top of, like if you dig a deep enough foundation and you fill it with, strong material, which a lot of these systems are, it's a good foundation, but that doesn't mean it's a house you want to live in. You have to actually build it out and use it correctly. So, the thing I always advocate for is like use what you have, just start using it more effectively and make everything talk to each other, orchestrate those outcomes you want. And really, you have these sources of continuous evaluation inside the enterprise already. You've already bought, a system like, say, a CrowdStrike or something. Leverage that for your identity outcomes. Similarly, you have these identity solutions that tell you about, hey, I know a directory, I know single sign-on, I know these things are happening, but when that's happening, look at the suitability. Like, if I'm trying to get into a production environment to push some code, and I'm on, like, I work for a big company, and I'm out on, say, family leave for 3 months, and I'm logging in to push a code, like, that should not be happening, right? So there's a check, like, against the state of the business, against the identity perimeter check, and then against your security controls is, hey, this doesn't match up, and either you need to escalate or block that. Those sorts of things aren't happening because we're not having these systems talk to each other. They all exist. So it's that archaeology of, like, not only what's there in the ground to work with, but how do I build upon that to get what I want, to get my skyscraper out of this and not, get a crumbling building.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about continuous and what makes continuousness, if that's a term, possible. And Matt, don't go far because we're coming to you next. But Eric, just going deeper into that, I've heard you and we had Felix Gakins on an earlier episode, and he, I think, was a co-author of the Gartner paper around identity first security, talking about the 3 C's. We talk a lot about continuous, but Eric, you were talking about some of the foundational items. How does context and consistent, as the other 2 C's, fit into the framework?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I look at all 3 are necessary. They're kind of a descriptor of what we're now just generally referring to as continuous identity. So you need, obviously, to do this constantly. That's the continuous part of this. But you need to take into account context. That example I gave of, hey, I'm on family leave and I'm suddenly, there's a login event for me to go into some sensitive production system. That's a good example of context. Like, normally, that's like my job to go in that production system. I'm supposed to be in there. I'm supposed to be deploying code. Like, that's normally what I do during the year. But I shouldn't be now because my context is different. It's like that security guard analogy or the hotel analogy where someone has a list of people who are actually not supposed to be in the building right now temporarily. They're kind of given that list, moment by moment, and they can enforce that when people are coming by them and they're checking the perimeter. That's what we mean by context. How do I pull that operational context, which would be like I'm on leave or I'm on, say, a PagerDuty rotation. So that's my turn, not Matt's turn to be in that production environment. How do I pull that in? How do I pull in security context? Like, hey, if I'm going to do something sensitive, I should probably be on a patched laptop. I should probably not have active malware running on my system. Those are all sort of basic things that organizations like big enterprises are already doing those things. But how do you connect that together to your identity tools so you get the outcome that you want? And then consistent, like, it shouldn't matter from a consistency point of view that I'm going through the web browser to get access to, say, AWS or Azure console, or using the command line tools. The same policy should apply. Just because I can go in one door or I can't go in one door better, I shouldn't be able to go in the side door too. Like, otherwise you're just creating Swiss cheese in your security posture. So that's what we mean by consistent. Like, we consistently apply policies. It doesn't really matter the way you're going about doing your job. Mm-hmm. We guard all the doors, entrances, and all the windows. That security guard is really on top of it. Contextually, like, I'm taking into account the full context that the enterprise has as much as possible. And then consistent or continuously, I'm just doing that all the time. Like, I'm not just doing it like once in a while, like once a quarter when I do an access review, or once a day when I'm pushing some batch job to update permissions, or when someone requests some access and I, as a manager who gets 100 of them a day, just like blindly says accept, and I forget that Matt's out on leave or something. I accept, and it's really not Matt. It's really someone who's impersonating Matt. That's what we mean by the 3 C's.
Yeah, makes sense to me. But Matt, maybe you can dive in deeper. I know you've written many places, including Signal's blog, and spoken at events about context pretty recently. So for someone who's managing identity at scale or at an enterprise, what does that business context that Eric referenced actually mean in practice? Can you give us like a more real example?
Yeah. The context is what you need it to be, right? We always talk about when we first engage the customer, when I'm talking to somebody who's interested in continuous identity, like a lot of times I'll say, well, start with the policy. Like, don't worry about the technology, right? If someone needs access to this system or this data, what are all the conditions that you could think of that you'd want to make sure are true? We talk about a lot of them here from a business context standpoint. The classic, is there a ticket open in your ITSM system, or whether that's ServiceNow or Jira or whatever it might be? And is it assigned to you? Or is it assigned to a group that you're a member of? Or is it a change task on a change request assigned to? The depth of the model can get pretty complex sometimes. And so that's where our identity graph helps you build those relationships to help tie those individuals to those specific business contexts. There's a lot of other business contexts there that I've seen talking to customers, and so back to sort of a CI/CD or code example at one of my former employers. If developer needed to check in code into the daily emergency branch, which went out every day, of course they had to be assigned to a certain project and it'd be a developer, all those things to give them access into GitHub. But there also had to be a change case inside of the environment, inside of the ticketing system that was signed off via VP. And so that's a real world use case where at the time that was the policy, and the developer had to put in the case number in text into the check-in comments. They weren't really enforcing that, right? That was the process, but it wasn't being hard enforced, right? It's one of those business concepts that we see often that it should be enforced. And there's other examples out there, a bit more of a maybe consumer facing, or one would be maybe not even consumer, but think about industries where you have a lot of maybe part-time workers or workers that can do many tasks in the organization, right? Or even contractors, to where the schedule for that individual or for the entire team, that becomes important business context. Because today, if I'm working at a retail store, maybe I'm just on the floor in the men's department, right? But next week I'm across town, I'm assistant manager for a shift, right? So I need different levels of access potentially in the system to both different sets of data and maybe different rights to be able to go, if I'm assistant manager, I should obviously have more rights over the systems of data and the schedule and the employees on the floor and things like that. So those use cases we see where there's sort of every time a person comes in to do their job, they may have a little bit of a different role in a different location. Same thing for grocery stores and things like that. So there's another good example of business context there. And then, on the security side, there's a ton of examples we've covered, right? XDR, risk signals, if somebody's password compromised the dark web. So a lot of inputs there as well to indicate whether or not somebody should have access to data right now.
Let's get even more practical without getting you into any trouble. So I'm curious if we can walk through like a specific example of continuous identity evaluation that you've seen a Signal customer implement. I'm not asking you to mention any customers by name, but if we generalize, can we talk about an actual policy? Like what triggers the evaluation? What data gets checked in real time, I assume, and how the system is making that access decision? How does a customer actually accomplish this?
How does it work? So we'll get a little more technical, I guess. And so I'll ask Eric to back me up in case he wants to add anything in as we go along here. So our classic use case, right, that a lot of our customers start with is Cloud PIM, Cloud Privileged Identity Management, right? They have cloud infrastructure that they use for their production environments. Oftentimes it's all three of the public clouds that they have spread across their environment, acquisition or whatever, department or whatever it is. And they want to basically limit access to production environments based off of continuous identity practices, right? So context and things like that. So step by step, right? Somebody would go, a user, if they need access to a production environment for, let's say, Amazon. As Eric mentioned earlier, almost everyone has single sign-on these days. So we'll use an example of that. So somebody logs into single sign-on. They complete their authentication, ideally with multi-factor authentication. But then right after the authentication step, that's where sort of we plug in. So all of the primary single sign-on vendors have a hook right there. Can be called an inline hook, or it can be called an identity event. The different vendors call different things, but that step is when they would call over to Signal and say, this person is trying to access this AWS account. Are they allowed to do so right now? And if so, what IAM roles based off of context in real-time data are they allowed to have right now? So when that call comes over to Signal, we have ways to answer questions with a yes or no. Most often for this use case, they reach over to Signal and say, what IAM roles are this person allowed to use right now? And we'll return a set of IAM roles. Most of the times, maybe a user has one or two IAM roles that they have a bit more persistently, right? That might be sort of base roles, but we'll also go check to see if those business contextual and security posture conditions are in place to return other more privileged roles. So if you need access to a production system or a production account, you would have to have that service desk ticket open. Again, we see things like ServiceNow or Jira, whatever it be. Oftentimes, it's not that the ticket's just created, but it's actually been approved. So we can look at the conditions of the tickets themselves. We're pulling that into our fabric to really have a good understanding of all that information. So if it's approved, if the XDR system of choice that you have, CrowdStrike, Intune, whatever it might be, says your risk score is low. And you can even throw another condition too, right? Maybe you only want for this particular AWS account, they have to be a US citizen. Maybe that's data we pulled from Workday. And so we look at all those conditions and we return those set of IAM roles. Those are put into the single sign-on claims. So they're putting into whether it's SAML or RDC, we inject those into the claims of the system, of the single sign-on flow. The user is redirected over to the Amazon login page. Amazon has a way to pull those claims out of the single sign-on claims, and then it presents the user with a choice. And so if there's 3 IAM roles that Signal said were authorized right now based off this context, then that user on the screen sees those 3 IAM roles, they select which one they want, and they go, and now they have access to Amazon only with that particular role. So it's bound to that session. They picked a role only for that session. And so that's the first part of the process. Now, the interesting thing there is that systems like cloud infrastructure providers and Amazon, they allow you to attach authorization or access IAM roles to a particular session. And in that flow, you just pass the source identity. You pass the identifier for the individual user that's attached to that session. You don't actually have to have a user in that AWS account for that user anymore. Okay, that's one of the big changes from a technology standpoint that makes a lot of continuous identity possible. So a lot of systems out there, they're allowing you to bind access to a session, right? And so in this case, it's IAM role, it's bound to a session. We've passed in who the actual user is. So and now as everything happens in AWS, everything goes into CloudWatch and all the logging happens associated with that individual human based off their identifier. But you really didn't have to have a user there anymore. Okay, and then the other important part of this process too is now that the user has access to AWS, they're working on their production issue that they were assigned to. Now, when anything changes in the environment based off of context, we want to pick that up and then remove their access. As Eric said, we're only in the hotel room for so long, conditions change. So if the ServiceNow or whatever our ticket closes, Signal will get a notification of that, and then we can go remediate access. So we can basically change the role on the fly in AWS. Go ahead.
Risk score changes or something. Yeah.
Exactly.
And then the reactive nature of that, I suppose, is what's the continuous component, and there's some consistency around that as well, be it centralization or across systems. How would you describe the consistency there?
Yeah, I mean, consistency in my mind again starts with the policy itself. Right, the policy is a business decision about who should have access to what. Where that's applied, the technology used is secondary, and now we have ways to make that possible. But the consistent policy that you write that says, people should only have access to production data if they're in a group and have a ticket, and CrowdStrike says they're okay. That can be enforced in many places. And so actually, I'm going to calling audible. I'm going to hand this one to Eric. Eric, do you want to talk about like a CI/CD pipeline where the same kinds of policies could be applied as we just went through this sort of infrastructure use case? A lot of the same rules and policies we see our customers using as they make changes to code, because that's what how stuff gets in production. Yeah, Eric?
Exactly. And you can do effectively the same thing. And something I like to point out to customers is if you have console access to the cloud or you have code, the ability to push code, that's really effectively the same thing, right? What's the point of being in the production infrastructure unless you're going to be manipulating something that's deployed? You could also manipulate the thing that's being deployed as well. So you want to put a lot of those same policies. So let's say you have to have the right ticket, or even to use the example Matt said, that merge something into the daily, and you want to have enforcement on that. You can run very similar policies. Hey, am I on call? Am I assigned to that ticket? Is my risk low? That same policy can be put into effect. You might want to layer in an extra policy around maybe repositories or something that's more specific to the code base. That'd be the equivalent of in the cloud console, there they have a concept of, they say, like region or what cloud it is that you're deploying to, like that's the equivalent there. So you'll have this mix of policies that are general, and that's where we think about consistent, but you might have some specific policies that are tuned to the very particular environment. And the idea is to keep those things so that you can compose them together. So in a CI/CD use case, let's say, we're following a normal Git workflow. I've got a branch, a patch branch I want to put into production. I might submit the pull request on that one. One of the checks in the pull request could be a policy check. Hey, the thing compiles, it passes all the tests, that's all great. You know, you're not going to merge broken code or things that don't compile. But also, am I allowed to be merging this right now? Maybe I generally have the rights. I'm a developer. I can do all these things, but I'm not the one supposed to be merging that because I don't have the open ticket signed off by that VP. It's going to block my merge. Now, let's say I do successfully merge it, and now they take the CI/CD side of this. I want to run that pipeline that actually compiles and pushes that code out to production. Then we could do the same sort of checks there. Let's say I pass the first hurdle. Yeah, I have the VP signed off on that ticket, and I'm allowed to push. Now it's merged in, it's going to go out. Let's just say that some other check goes wrong. Let's say that ticket, the VP, she unassigns that from me suddenly. She probably block that push. Like, let's say, oops, I clicked the wrong ticket. That wasn't supposed to go today. That's supposed to go out next week. We should stop it there. Similarly, there's probably a service account involved here too. That's another place you can do these sort of checks. Like, that's a great example of sort of the non-human service account identities, machine identities. We can check those too. It's just an identity check. Is this supposed to be running right now? Is this being abused for something else? Is it doing things it's not supposed to? Is it talking to environments it's not supposed to talk to? Those are all forms of policy check. It doesn't matter who the actor is, who the identified person taking the action is. You can still run a policy check on it, and you can run a lot of the same policy checks. So, you can start to see how through relatively simple policy concepts, you can build up this very sophisticated, wide-ranging set of behaviors and outcomes you want, but starting from building blocks that are easy to manage and understand.
You're reminding me, Eric, a little bit about the fact that Signal talks to some pretty massive customers in complex enterprises. And I assume that even though parts of those organizations are extremely advanced and modern, there's some legacy systems that still exist and maybe some homegrown stuff. And how does the consistent enforcement look across all those different systems and SaaS applications and different approaches, but with the same, outcome in interest? How does Signal address that?
I think it's about identifying where are those control points. So I gave an example of GitHub. I have a control point in the pull request process, and I have a control point in the CI/CD pipeline that pushes code to production. And I also probably have a control point around that service account that's under the covers actually doing those credential checks, and maybe the cloud itself could have one. So it's about identifying what are those places. Not all software is created equal. There's a tremendous amount of legacy systems out there. And so if you've got something that runs on a box in the basement and you have to go down there and get on a physical keyboard to work on it, has no outside world connectivity, you're probably going to struggle to put a policy necessarily in front of that. You're probably better off putting the policy on the door badge scanner to the room but that's the control point. But also your risk of abuse of that from it not being networked, as not being online, is lower. So we usually think about this like Ian Glazer, who's another Signal employee and well-known author in the space, coined this term of the pyramid of pain. And it's really, if you think about the systems that you have and if you rank them from highest risk to you to lowest risk, and risk is, it's going to be depending on the environment. Different companies have different things that they find risky. Maybe you have a lot of customer data in a system and that's your high risk. Maybe an application has a large population of users who use it. So it's harder for you to control if the entire company uses something that has very sensitive information in it, or maybe 30% of your company, you're an engineering company, has access to do production code pushes. That's probably at the top of your pyramid. That's the most painful thing to you that you really need to think about protecting. Start there, look at those control points, walk down the pyramid towards the bottom, which are the things that probably are either lower risk to you or less likely to have problems, or maybe they're systems that are on their way out the door. Maybe that mainframe in the basement with a physical keyboard is slated to be removed in a couple of years, fingers crossed on that project. Maybe it's not worth, the juice is not worth the squeeze to protect that thing. You might get better mileage out of, hey, let me protect how my Salesforce instance works instead, because that's actually always on. I have problems where I want to guard against people going in there and extracting exfilling data to use it for insider trading. Like those are legitimate real use cases that you need to have. Accountants need to have access to put the quarterly books together. Great. But if they are using that, or someone's in there all the time, they can use that for the wrong purposes, or they can get maybe they're not a bad actor themselves, maybe it's not an insider risk, but it's, hey, someone phishes their account and takes it over. They get a phishing email and they click the link, and now you've got someone scraping their keyboard, grabs that session, loads into their browser, and now they can go see that and they can do that insider trading. It's those sorts of things you want to protect against, like what causes the problems in your organization. Start there, go down that list, and then figure out what it is that you can control. There's a choke point for everything. Figure out what that choke point is, and then put the policy there. And it's surprising how many systems can do this and how many techniques. You've got proxies, API gateways. Like I mentioned, you could probably wire this up to physical checks, because those are just another network system for you. Your single sign-on tools are a great way to do this. So there's a lot of control points you can exert against your sensitive workloads.
Matt, I'm creating a picture in my mind, this mental model of all these interwoven components. There's context, which is coming in from different systems. There's the control points that Eric's mentioning. There's the identity stack. But you mentioned starting with policy, and policy seems to be this really powerful, centralized approach. And I'm curious how customers are really addressing consistently but flexibly enough to handle all these different requirements. It sounds like, especially in these large customers, there's got to be a lot of different policies, right? Is there a complexity that customers start to introduce and overhead because they're these huge enterprises? We've got to do, a myriad of policies to address this?
Yeah, there is. I mean, I think defining who should have access to what is an idea that's been around for as long as I've been around, for 20 years, right? So people have programs around this. They've again, since it's a kind of separated from technology, there are ways to build working groups inside of an organization to try to figure out what those base policies are. I think, what we've seen in practice with our customers is back to kind of what Eric said, like start with the most important thing and start with one thing, right? Figure out exactly the highest risk and what you're trying to protect and what policies and conditions that you might want to have in place to protect those systems. And so we have one customer who had an initiative that was born out of security concern based off of things that have happened, where their number one goal was just to say, I want to be able to limit access or remove access from a few critical systems based simply off of a XDR risk score. I have a funded project just for that. right? And so they were able to start small, right? Because they found a policy, a consistent policy that they wanted to apply across a broad range of applications and implement at a broad range of control points. And so sometimes it's about keeping, your focus narrow in the beginning to either some systems of data or maybe to a particular policy that will be broadly applied. In that case, like they definitely got the most bang for their buck by starting with a kind of a narrow policy really tied to a business initiative in the organization. And so that's most often what we see, as you get further and further down in more broad use cases, which we see happen all the time with our customers, right? Is that some small amount of success in the organization by focusing on that particular application set or on that sort of global policy really brings in other people in the organization. And so there gets to be a lot more focus on it. And different departments will come in, different application owners and say, we want that. We want to be able to add to this. And so it does take, as you get large organizations get broad with their set of application data and policies, it does take some work, right? The goal is to remain consistent, though. If you can separate out the business controls from the technology implementation and reuse it over time, that's the best outcome. I've seen customers who have sort of done some centralized authorization, but they basically just relinquish it to every application owner can do whatever they want, right? It's inconsistent. It's hard to audit. It's you see massive amounts of role explosion and bloat explosion, policy explosion over time. So, the guidance from us, and I think most folks in the industry is, this is a programmatic journey that you're on. Start early, see some success. You also have to bake consistency into the process itself, right? So, one of the ways that Signal helps with that is, our policies are broken out in what we call snippets. So you have who, the principal, to do what, which is like access or create or whatever it is, to what thing, to asset, under what conditions. So we allow you to sort of break out each of these out into small chunks and reuse them. And so, if you say DevOps engineers, that might mean members of the DevOps group in Okta, but what if you acquired 3 other companies that don't use Okta? They use something else, right? Entra or whatever it is. So you say, if somebody's in the DevOps group in Okta or in Entra or in Ping, because we have all 3 of those, we're a large organization, that's still DevOps users, right? And so there's definitely value in being able to centralize and compartmentalize the business conditions into technology appropriate with those decisions. And so same things with assets and things like that and conditions, right? So thinking through those business processes, building an internal team that focuses on that and tries to also force consistency as you go more broad is really important.
As we start to kind of wind down here, I'm curious. So customers start to implement this or are implementing it. Eric, how do you know it's actually working? There's some metrics, I guess, around measurements and breaches or breaches avoided or something. But how does a business say, yep, this is proving an ROI to executives?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess we'll talk about a couple things. Let me actually address the ante. Like, how do you know, what our failing strategies look like first? Because then I can talk about what success looks like. So,
sure.
Common pitfalls and mistakes I've seen happen. One is to confuse the idea of developer tooling. There's lots of nice things out there. Open Policy Agent comes to mind as it's a great thing, or Cedar from AWS is another one. These are in Google world, Zanzibar. These are great tools for building authorization inside of an application, right? This is a great way for how does YouTube manage who I share videos to, or Google Drive manage that, or how do I write a policy inside my workload? But that operates in the context of that particular system, right? The concept. So it's like a database for policy. And I see a bad outcome is when companies confuse that. And they confuse that with the type of enterprise-wide policies we're talking about that are trying to be continuous and consistent across everything. Those aren't the same, because a concept of a user, like the best way to think about it is every application is going to have some button in it that does something, right? You click the button and it orders a pizza, or you click the button and it buys you an airline ticket. You can't really generalize that to buttons. Matt can click buttons is well, does this mean Matt can order airline tickets or Matt can order pizzas? That's not those policies, not to use too sort of nerdy of a word, but aren't fungible, across applications, they're siloed. And so when enterprises confuse that and try to build, a developer's like, hey, I can do these things in this application. Let me apply that to all 10,000 applications. You quickly run into this whole morass of I've got all these, I've written all this code to do everything. It's a grand unification theory, and it doesn't work out well. You get the negative outcome of things go slower. Like the more applications you build, the slower it is to roll out policies, the harder it is to do things. So that's a negative outcome. So success in those terms looks like the more systems you bring into your continuous identity solution, the easier each additional system is dead on, because you've built up those concepts, you've built up, that notion of a DevOps group or the notion of a set of actions. You start to build out those sort of policy components, and then you can layer them together and go faster. The other negative outcome I see from people is they think about this in terms of, look at it from a straight identity governance lifecycle management point of view. And the main thing you're dealing with that is groups. So if you start having group explosion, where I've got 10 times as many groups in my company as I have humans, and suddenly I'm creating all these really bizarre users who are not on vacation, who are on rotation, who are in North America, who have access to AWS, and who are developers, that is not the role. That's not what you go tell your mom you do for work. You don't tell you're in that role. So those things, when you start having that role explosion, that's a negative outcome too. And that creates a lot of pain, because you get audit fatigue when you have to do quarterly access reviews on that. If you're a public company and you have to follow Sarbanes-Oxley, it's difficult to know what does what. People are really freaked out about removing groups and roles. If you have that role explosion problem, then that's another anti-outcome. And I think a really good success metric for a continuous identity system is you can start winding down groups. You can start just getting rid of them because you're not using the group as a control surface anymore. You can simplify your architecture. And that actually makes your IGA program go faster, because you do need something to govern things. You need a control surface. You need to run those quarterly access reviews on at least some fundamental things. Like Matt still works here, and Matt still is in the product marketing group. He's not in the sales group. Those are important distinctions that you want to be able to manage. So, but that's a very easy to understand set of roles and groups. And so success looks like smaller, more manageable, or fewer, not necessarily smaller numbers of members, but more manageable groups, and getting rid of all these sort of Frankenstein groups you've been creating to try to solve this problem. And then the third one I see, the third big failure is, well, I'm looking at this from a privileged access point of view. Access to the cloud is a privileged operation. And you start, if you're minting PAM licenses for everybody in the company to do their job, those tools are designed for IT admins to get access to Cisco routers or root passwords, or the things that you use to bootstrap a system in the very beginning, and you need kind of that break glass, put it in the safe in the basement in case the lights go out and there's a blackout and hurricanes and all sorts of bad outcomes are happening. Then you'll get those passwords out and use them. Otherwise, you're using a single sign-on solution.
Yep.
If you start giving everybody PAM licenses and everyone's using credentials for everything, one, you're going the wrong direction from our current trend towards passwordless. Two, it's really, really expensive and really cumbersome to do it that way, because it wasn't designed for cloud-based access control. So I'd say, to sum it up, the three key things you see a successful program is, as you go further, it's easier. Your number of roles reduce, and the number of people who have to have access to your PAM solution doesn't explode. It stays what it was meant for in the first place. Those are sort of the three things I'd look at. It depends on the nature of the initial projects you're working on, the initial programs, but that's how you're going on the right path.
Well, I think this triple play has been a success and down the right path. So a couple of final points here, a little bit of fun for my colleagues. Matt, we like to ask folks on the interview here on the CI sessions, in the interest of continuity or continuousness, which is my new favorite word, what's something you continuously do or continuously attempt? Probably is outside of work, just for fun or a hobby or something along those lines.
I am a lifelong guitar beginner.
There you go.
So every so many years I pick it up and I play a bunch, and I sort of hit a wall, and then I make it a little further than that wall, but not to the point where I'd say I'm proficient yet. So that's throughout my life, on and off, continuous activity that I do. Other than that, it's usually I'm continuously working with I've got 2 boys that are teenagers, so learning whatever they're learning, relearning whatever they're working on. So calculus this week, or physics, maybe physics next week, things like that.
Yeah, Eric, how about you?
What do I like to do continuously? So many different answers. I'm going to go with something like not so, there's a lot of work things. I'm always trying to, self-improve, or always trying to learn like new technology. I try to write, I'm doing a lot of vibe coding in the evenings to see what kind of fun things I can build, and playing around with those tools. But I think outside of work, more interesting, like I'm an avid skier. And so in the winter, I try to continuously go skiing as much as possible. I probably need to rethink where I live in California if I want to bring that to sort of year round. Maybe I need to relocate to the Southern Hemisphere for part of the year or something to really do that continuously. So I'd say a part year continuousness.
That works. And where can we find you both in the not too distant future? Events, speaking sessions. Matt, I think you'll be close to home in the next couple of weeks, hopefully.
Yeah, so I'm here in Austin, Texas. I've been here for a long time. But next week I will be at the SailPoint Navigate event. So we'll be there working with them. We're going to have some nice demonstrations and some co-speaking slots with SailPoint to show off some nice use cases around the integration of 2 products, bringing continuous identity and IGA together for some lower risk. So it should be great. So there, and then after that, probably Gartner. I am later on in the year in Fort Worth. Yeah.
Nice. Eric?
I'll also be doing a quick stop in for a couple of days at Navigate. Also, so I'll get to see Matt there as well. Maybe we can go grab some barbecue or something while I'm in town.
There you go.
And then next one, I think I'll be down towards your neck of the woods, Dustin, for Authenticate. I think that's in October. I'll be down there for a couple of days as well.
Yeah, we'll have to do some real world continuous identity sessions. So thanks again to Eric and Matt for joining us today. Thanks for everyone joining us today, tomorrow, every day on demand. Reminder, you can use that Ask the Expert button at signal.ai and schedule a demo if you have follow-up questions. We also have some resources here within the webinar modal. All of these sessions are recorded and available at signal.ai and on our YouTube channel. You can subscribe there at signal.ai, get all the details, upcoming episodes, all the docs linked and the resources, as well as any tools mentioned in the follow-up email if you are a subscriber. So please subscribe. And until next time, let's continuously work to keep making identity work better. I'm Dustin Avall. We'll see you next time on Continuous Identity Sessions. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.